On November 17th, 1894, H. Holmes, or Herman Webster Mudgett, was arrested in Boston, Massachusetts. Holmes, who had built a career on swindling, lying, and scamming, thought that he would be out of jail soon as he was only being held on an insurance fraud charge. But Philadelphia detective Frank Geyer had built an entire case against him that would expose him as a man who was not afraid to kill for money. Welcome to History's Biggest Villains. H. Holmes was born Herman Webster Mudgett on May 16, 1861, to Levi Mudgett and Theodate Price. He was the middle of 5 children, and he had an older sister named Ellen, an older brother named Arthur, a younger sister named Mary, and a younger brother named Henry. Holmes's father was from a farming family, but he worked as a farmer, a trader, and a house painter. There have been so many attempts to paint Holmes as a serial killer, and they have described him as torturing animals and suffering from abuse from his father, but most eyewitness accounts of his childhood couldn't prove either of these stories. On July 4th, 1878, he married Clara Lovington. Their son, Robert Mudgett, was born on February 3rd, 1880. A year before, he had enrolled in the University of Vermont in Burlington at age 18, but left after a year. In 1882, he enrolled at the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery and graduated in June 1884 after passing his exams. While in college, he worked in the anatomy lab under Professor William James Herdman, the chief anatomy instructor, and the two were said to have been grave robbing to supply medical cadavers. Holmes had apprenticed in New Hampshire under Nahum White, a noted advocate of human dissection. Years later, when Holmes was suspected of murder and claimed to be nothing but an insurance fraudster, he admitted to using cadavers to defraud life insurance companies several times in college. Friends of Clara described Holmes as being physically abusive towards her, and in 1884, before his graduation, she moved back to New Hampshire, and she never heard from him again. After he moved to Moores, New York, a rumor spread that Holmes had been seen with a little boy who later disappeared. Holmes claimed that the boy went back to his home in Massachusetts. There was no investigation, and Holmes quickly left town. He later traveled to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and got a job as a keeper at Norristown State Hospital, but quit after a few days. He later worked at a drugstore in Philadelphia, but while he was working there, a boy died after taking medicine that was purchased at the store. Holmes denied any involvement in the death of the child and immediately left town. In late 1886, while still married to Clara, Holmes married Myrta Belknap in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He filed for divorce from Clara a few weeks after marrying Myrta, alleging infidelity on her part. The claims couldn't be proven and the suit went nowhere. Holmes had a daughter with Myrta, Lucy Holmes, who was born on July 4th, 1889 in Chicago, Illinois. Holmes lived with Myrta and Lucy in Wilmette, Illinois, and spent most of his time in Chicago tending to quote-unquote business, or, his scams. Holmes married Georgiana Yoke on January 17th, 1894 in Denver, Colorado, while still married to both Clara and Myrta. Right before moving to Chicago in 1896, he changed his name to Henry Howard Holmes to avoid the possibility of being exposed by victims of his previous insurance scams. He came across Elizabeth S. Holton's drugstore at the northwest corner of South Wallace Avenue and West 63rd Street in Englewood. Holton gave Holmes a job. He was a really good employee, eventually buying the drugstore. Holmes purchased an empty lot across from the drugstore where construction began in 1887 for a 2-story building with apartments on the second floor and retail spaces, including a new drugstore. When Holmes refused to pay the architects or the steel company, they sued him in 1888. In 1892, he added a 3rd floor, telling investors and suppliers he intended to use it as a hotel during the upcoming World's Fair. In 1892, the hotel was somewhat finished with 3 stories and a basement. The ground floor was the storefront. Reports by highly sensationalized media or the yellow press labeled the building as Holmes' murder castle, claiming the structure contained secret torture chambers, trap doors, gas chambers, and a basement crematorium, none of which was true. Other accounts claimed that the hotel was made up of over 100 rooms and laid out like a maze, with doors opening into brick walls, windowless rooms, and dead-end staircases. In reality, the hotel floor was of medium size and was pretty plain. It did contain some hidden rooms, but they were used for hiding furniture Holmes bought on credit and was not intending to pay for. One of Holmes's early victims was his mistress, Julia Smythe. She was the wife of Ned Connor, who had moved into Holmes' building and began working at his pharmacy's jewelry counter. After Connor found out Smith's affair with Holmes, he quit his job and moved away, leaving Smythe and her daughter Pearl behind. I understand the wife, but the daughter? Smith gained custody of Pearl and remained at the hotel, continuing her relationship with Holmes. Julia and Pearl disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1891, and Holmes later claimed that she died during an abortion. Despite his medical background, Holmes was unlikely to have any experience in carrying out abortions, but deaths from abortions were pretty common at this time. Holmes claimed to have poisoned Pearl, likely to hide the circumstances of her mother's death. A partial skeleton, possibly of a child around Pearl's age, was found when excavating Holmes' cellar. Emmeline Sagrande began working in the building in May 1892 and disappeared that December. Rumors claimed that she got pregnant by Holmes and possibly died during another failed abortion from Holmes. Another young girl who worked for Holmes in his building named Emily Van Tessel vanished as well. While working in the Chemical Bank building on Dearborn Street, Holmes met and became close friends with Benjamin Pitezel, a carpenter with a shady past who was presenting a coal bin that he'd invented. Holmes used Pitezel as his right-hand man for several criminal schemes. A district attorney would later describe Pitezel as Holmes' tool and his creature. In early 1893, an actress named Minnie Williams moved to Chicago. Holmes claimed to have met her in an employment office. He offered her a job at the hotel as his personal stenographer, and she accepted the job. Holmes persuaded Williams to transfer the deed to her property in Fort Worth, Texas, to a man named Alexander Bond, which was an alias that Holmes had made up. Williams transferred the deed, with Holmes serving as a notary, later signing the deed over to Pitezel, giving him the alias Benton T. Lyman. The next month, Holmes and Williams, acting as husband and wife, rented an apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Minnie's sister Annie came to visit, and in July, she wrote to her aunt that she planned to accompany her brother to Europe. Neither Minnie nor Annie were seen alive after July 5th, 1893. Although never proven, Holmes was suspected of killing 6 other people who had vanished between 1891 and 1895. Dr. Rustler, who had an office in the building, went missing in 1892. Kitty Kelly, another stenographer for Holmes, also went missing in 1892. John G. Davis of Greenville, Pennsylvania, went to visit the 1893 World's Fair and vanished. Henry Walker of Greensburg, Indiana, went missing in November 1893, was alleged to have taken out a life insurance policy through Holmes for $20,000, and wrote to friends that he was working for Holmes in Chicago. Milford Cole of Baltimore, Maryland, was alleged to have disappeared after receiving a telegram from Holmes to come to Chicago in July 1894. An otherwise unknown victim was Lucy Burbank, as her bank book was found in the building in 1895. There are even rumors spread by Holmes' great-great-grandson that he might be Jack the Ripper. Handwriting comparisons between the Dear Boss letter that the Ripper wrote and Holmes' handwriting were similar. Holmes suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth from July of 1888 to the beginning of 1889, which would fit the time frame of Jack the Ripper's murder spree from August to November of 1888. After Mary Kelly, the Ripper's last victim, was found, a ship log in England showed a passenger named H. Holmes heading for America. Holmes had extensive medical training in dissection and organ removal at the University of Michigan, and 3 victims of the Ripper were found with their organs removed. Scotland Yard's profile of the Ripper was a man who was 5'7", between 140 to 160 pounds, and between 25 to 35 years old. Holmes was 5'7", 147 pounds, and 27 years old at the time. That leaves a lot of room for speculation, I can't lie to you. With insurance companies pressing to prosecute him for insurance fraud by arson, Holmes left Chicago in July 1894. He reappeared in Fort Worth, where he had inherited property from the Williams sisters, who were still missing, by the way. Here, he once again attempted to build an incomplete structure without paying his suppliers or contractors. In July of that year, Holmes was arrested for the first time on the charge of selling mortgage goods in St. Louis, Missouri. While in jail, he had a conversation with a convicted outlaw named Marion Hedgepeth, who was serving a 25-year sentence. Holmes had devised a plan to swindle an insurance company out of $10,000 by taking out a life insurance policy on himself and then faking his death. Sounds like a great plan. Holmes promised Hedgepeth a $500 commission in exchange for the name of a lawyer that could be trusted. Holmes was directed to a young St. Louis attorney named Jephthah Howe, who thought Holmes' scheme was brilliant, so he agreed to play a part. However, Holmes' plan to fake his own death failed when the insurance company became suspicious and refused to pay. Holmes did not press the claim. Instead, he devised a similar plan with Pitezel. Pitezel agreed to fake his own death so that his wife, Carrie, would collect on a $10,000 life insurance policy, which she would split with Holmes and Howe. The scheme, which was to take place in Philadelphia, called for Pitezel to set himself up as an inventor under the name B.F. Perry and then be killed and disfigured in a lab explosion. Holmes was to find a cadaver to play the role of Pitezel. Instead, Holmes killed Pitezel by knocking him unconscious with chloroform and setting his body on fire with benzene. In his confession, Holmes implied Pitezel was still alive after he used the chloroform and before he set him on fire. However, forensic evidence presented at the trial showed chloroform had been administered after Pitezel's death, possibly to stage a suicide to exonerate Holmes should he be charged with murder. Holmes collected the insurance payout on the basis of the real Pitezel corpse. Holmes then manipulated Carrie into allowing 3 of her 5 children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, to be placed into his custody. So you're telling me this guy devised a plan for your husband to fake his death and you trust him with your children? Oh, okay. Holmes and the 3 Pitezel children traveled through the northern United States and into Canada. Simultaneously, he escorted Miss Pitezel along a parallel route, all the while using various aliases and lying to her concerning her husband's death, claiming Pitezel was hiding in London, as well as lying to her about the true whereabouts of her 3 now missing children. Wow, look at that. All the while, Holmes was staying at another location with his wife, or one of them, who was unaware of the whole affair. Holmes' murder spree finally ended when he was arrested in Boston on November 17, 1894. After being tracked there from Philadelphia by the private Pinkerton National Detective Agency. He was held on an outstanding warrant for horse theft in Texas. Holmes volunteered to be extradited to Philadelphia for the insurance fraud as he felt he would get off easy, as Texas was notorious for handing out harsh sentences to horse thieves. The City of Philadelphia Police Department sent Detective Thomas Crawford to Boston to bring H. Holmes and his accomplice, Miss Pitezel, to Philadelphia for a trial. Frank Geyer was tasked with investigating, and the trail led him through the Midwest and Toronto, Canada, where he found the remains of 2 of the Pitezel children. Holmes later confessed to murdering Alice and Nellie by forcing them into a large trunk and locking them inside. He drilled a hole in the lid of the trunk and put one end of a hose through the hole, attaching the other end to a gas line to asphyxiate the girls. Holmes then buried their nude bodies in the cellar of his rental house at 16 St. Vincent Street in Toronto. Detective Geyer wrote, "The deeper we dug, the more horrible the odor became. And when we reached a depth of 3 feet, we discovered what appeared to be the bone of the forearm of a human being." Geyer then went to Indianapolis, where Holmes had rented a cottage. Holmes had reported to have visited a local pharmacy to purchase the drugs he used to kill Howard Pitezel and a repair shop to sharpen the knives he used to chop up the body before he burned it. The boy's teeth and bits of bones were discovered in the Holmes chimney. They were all the children of Benjamin Pitezel, Holmes' former partner in crime, who he had also murdered to commit life insurance fraud. Carrie Pitezel, however, was only involved in the fraud and had no knowledge of the murders. That'd be a crazy way to find out what happened to your whole family. You literally trusted this dude in a life insurance scam, and he ends up killing your entire family. Wow. In October 1895, Holmes was put on trial for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel and was found guilty and sentenced to death. The funny thing is, this was the only murder he was tried for. Even though Frank Geyer had found evidence that he had killed the other 3 children, they didn't charge him for that. Following his conviction, Holmes confessed to 27 murders in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Toronto, though some of the people he confessed to murdering were still alive, and he also confessed to 6 attempted murders. Holmes was paid $7,500 by the Hearst newspapers in exchange for his confession, which was quickly found to be mostly nonsense, like a lot of the claims he made after his arrest. On May 7th, 1896, Holmes was hanged at the Philadelphia County Prison for the murder of Pitezel. Until the moment of his death, Holmes remained calm, showing very few signs of fear, anxiety, or depression. Despite this, He asked for his coffin to be contained in cement and buried 10 feet deep because he was concerned that grave robbers would try to steal his body and use it for dissection. How ironic. Upon his execution, Holmes's body was buried in an unmarked grave at Holy Cross Cemetery in Yeadon, Pennsylvania. His hotel was burned down by an unknown arsonist in August of 1895 after Holmes was arrested. A story from the New York Times says that 2 men were seen entering the back of the building around 8 to 9 p.m. About 30 minutes later, they were seen exiting the building and rapidly running away. Following several explosions, the castle went up in flames. Afterwards, investigators found a half-empty gas can underneath the back steps of the building. The building was largely rebuilt and used as a post office until 1938. On New Year's Eve of 1909, Hedgepeth, an accomplice in Holmes's fake death fraud scheme, who had been pardoned for giving up information on Holmes, was shot and killed by a police officer, Edward Jabarick, during a holdup at a Chicago saloon. As Holmes was known as a compulsive liar, this still continues to be one of the most sensationalized cases in history. This has led to a myriad of stories being told that were later proven not to be true. Many people tried to paint him as a serial killer, but he didn't really display any of the trait of a serial killer. He was a con man who wouldn't think twice about killing someone to make money or to cover up his crimes. Thank you so much for watching, man. I really appreciate all the support for the channel, man. The last video, you guys are really going crazy on that video. Like, I'm really just like, wow. I really appreciate y'all so much. But thank you so much for the support. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Thank you so much, and let me know what other cases I should do. But anyways, I'm out. Peace.